believe that they were on their way, either on their way to or on their way back from a trip to Europe, in which there were a lot of correspondences that made their way into the newspapers from Croton, Bishop here, from Paris. So again, you start to see these ties back after World War I between, I believe, Clifford Harmon and Paris and France.
Blake, do you have any idea how tall he was?
How what now?
Tall?
I really don't know. I mean, I don't know.
He looks tall.
He looks tall in almost every photograph, and if you look at him behind the controls of some of the planes, he looks like he's towering up to the the overwing of the biplane. And
I
he's
like the hat.
I love the bowler. Don't you love the bowler? In fact, I'll tell you, his friend Cortland Bishop died in 1935, and died still a fairly young man. Okay, I'm guessing. I don't really know, but I'm guessing he was in his early 60s at the time. And to my surprise, the photograph of him in that obituary looks exactly like this. And I'm guessing this photograph was taken in the 1920s. Okay, I'm not certain about that. But if I'm right about trying to date that particular trip, I think it was. Now, we're going to kind of come to a close here, trying to learn a lot about the man. Learn more about the man, Clifford Harmon, than we learn about kind of the history of what he developed. Because he developed so many places. He's important to the history of so many other places. Besides Pelham Wood in the area where I live, and besides Harmon-on-Hudson. In that lower left-hand corner, you're looking at an undated wire service photo, probably about 1910, that controls the biplane. And once again, another undated wire photo, probably about 1910. And it certainly looks to me like, and I know that experts could do this. I'm not an expert, but it certainly looks like the Harmon biplane to me. But in his later life, while he's visiting Caen in France, he suffers a paralyzing stroke. And in effect, never left Caen again. And that's pretty fascinating because you've got to think about this. That's early in the 1940s. And the Germans, in fact, do take control of Caen, and he's there, and he can't be moved. And a lot of sources say that he was, in fact, captured and imprisoned. And if you look at his obituary closely and you read some of the sources about his life and the like, you start to realize that it seems very unlikely that he was captured and imprisoned. But clearly he was not free to leave, not free to move, and clearly physically was incapable of that. He lived the remainder of his life there in Caen throughout World War II, and he watched from the Hotel Martinez in Caen as German troops took over the city on the Riviera. Now, in an interview just a few months before he died at the age of 79, he talked about what he had seen during the course of his life there in Caen after suffering his stroke. And what he said was that he saw the show there in Caen from his hotel window. He described attacks by dive bombers, and it's interesting that once again, he's viewing the war through the prism of the aerial attacks as the Germans enter. And he describes the attacks by the dive bombers and says that every night, and now you quote him directly, the nights were horrible. And he says most Americans and Britons that had been in Caen were moved inland. But since he was too helpless to move without any aid, in effect, he was left behind in the apartment. But he told the interviewer in this last interview only a couple of months before he died, and I'm quoting him exactly, "I never spoke to a German." That's what he told the interviewer, and wanted that in the interview at the time. So you could just feel the pain, and you could feel kind of the trauma, and you could feel what he had experienced and what he had been through on that. He died there in Caen at the age of 79 on June 25th, 1945, just in time to see American forces liberate that particular area. And he's buried in the American Military Cemetery, and now I can't do this. It's French that's beyond me. My only Romance language is Spanish. Draguignan, I'll spell it for you, Draguignan. And he is really known today as the creator of and donor of the Harmon Trophy, one of his legacies, for outstanding achievement in world aeronautics. And it really has been awarded infrequently, but was for many years considered the epitome of performance by any aviator or astronaut. And you and I really know him as the developer of Harmon-on-Hudson and Pelhamwood, because those are our homes. There are a lot of others out there that know him as the developer of their homes as well. But I hope that tonight you got to know him a little bit more of him as a man and a little bit more about him than you might otherwise have ever dreamed would be the case. This is the man that created your home. Thank you very much. I enjoyed this.
Two questions. A, where the photograph of the train, the people coming to Harmon is, can we kind of locate that on the tracks? And secondly, when he developed Harmon, was there a street layout at the time, or did he do that as he was developing? And what I'm getting at, if you look at Harmon, it looks like a racetrack at the top of that knoll. And I don't know anything about that racetrack, but I lived there as a kid, and I'd like to know more.
Sure. The real, the real answer, I've got some suspicions, is I don't know. I don't know enough about the local history here. I will say that I have seen that in quite a number of his developments, he did take a circular tack. Okay? That's certainly the case in Pelhamwood. Okay? There is a large circle. And as you begin to enter the circle there are stone gates at one end and a stone clock tower at the other. So he clearly tried to demarcate the entry to the development. But there was a circular development as part of that. So it would not surprise me to see that that would be the case here. There should be maps that will tell us that. Certainly for Pelham, we've got maps all in that time frame that help us see what was done. We know what was planned by the developers before him, before he came along, and what was scrapped as that development and then picked up by him for what he did. I don't know, the reason I'm bringing the photograph back up here is because many of you in the room are certainly going to be better than I in terms of trying to locate that particular location. When I studied this photograph, the things that struck me about it, okay, and you have to remember, I see this through the prism, or I see this through the eyes of a local historian in Pelham. But the things that struck me were that you've got a couple of towers here that begin to, they're small, squat, I agree, but little towers here that begin to demarcate to me, the areas here. I don't know whether those were temporary. They certainly look like they were temporary to me, but my eye saw that and said, well, this would be in Pelhamwood where the stone gates were, and they even evoke that in my eye. And this would be where the clock tower was as you begin to enter the area that is being developed. So again, I can look at that and I may be just reading too much into it.
I think those are railroad towers. That's a crossing gate. The front one in the back there is a tower for
signaling or something.
Switches.
Yep.
At the end of the yard.
Because again, I can't even tell you where this is, and I'm hoping you guys will be able to do that, here. When I see this again, as I say, I see this all through the eyes of someone saying, is this similar to anything that I see in Pelhamwood? Because I don't know the history here as much as I would like to. But if anyone can place that, that would be an awfully nice thing.
There you can see the bridge.
Yeah.
Towards it in the back. Yeah. That's where the bay meets the river.
Right.
Jordan Bay and Hudson.
It's very interesting to me because I had not thought of this in terms of some kind of crossing or railroad. What I thought of this here, I didn't know. I thought that this most likely would be a place in which they would meet personnel or have material for them as they were trying to sell the land, but I didn't know that. I know as much about this photograph as you see here, quite frankly, and only can date it, based on the fact that the material that it comes from dates it as 1907. Any more? Yes?
Do you know the story of how Croton, why the trains always stop at Harmon?
Well,
You know the history behind that?
I'll try. Let's see if I get this right. Among other things, when they were trying to expand portions of the line or improve portions of the line, they needed some additional land at the time, and they in fact acquired that from Harmon. And at the time, he indicated that the land, if he was going to sell the land, he would restrict it in the sense that they would always have to retain the name Harmon in the station. Now, it's interesting to me that you suggest a little bit more than that also, because that was also the case in Pelham.
Oh, really? All trains stop at Pelham?
All
also?
trains required to stop at Pelham, and the reason, the way they did it was, it's not that all trains stop at Pelham, it was that all trains that stop in Mount Vernon must also stop in Pelham.
Oh.
Pelham is only a few, 2 minutes away from Mount Vernon. And what happened was, when the land was sold at the time, when the land at that time, not sold, now Harmon sold the land to the railroad. In Pelham, the land was given to the railroad in exchange for the promise that all trains that stopped in Mount Vernon would stop in Pelham.
I see.
So, and of course, that was critical to the success of a community. If the train passed you by, you weren't going to live at that point in time, given the distance you were from the city, in effect. So, and I don't know that it may well have been the case that happened in many other places. I know, for example, and this doesn't affect you, but the branch line, as they call it, okay, which in Pelham there are 2 lines of what we think of as the New Haven today that pass through Pelham. One now is used principally by freight and by Amtrak, and we call that the branch line, and it was known as the branch line for nearly a century. Homeowners were thrilled to donate the land to the railroad in the late 1860s, early 1870s, as that branch line was being planned and then ultimately was built. Because to them, to have the railroad coming through that land was going to open it up to development and was going to substantially improve the value of the real estate. That's what Clifford Harmon was trying to do here. There's no doubt about it. And he succeeded wildly in doing that.
I guess the question with that and the follow-up would be, what came first, Harmon and that stop, or that everything in and out of New York City had to stop and change engines? And I don't know where that began, but it had to begin someplace.
It had to be in someplace. I don't know the answer to that either, but I'll tell you what the early newspaper articles indicate, okay? And this is just tangential, it doesn't answer your question exactly. The newspaper articles suggest to me that Harmon knew that the railroad was extending to this area at the time, and bought up that piece of the Van Cortlandt property a year or so before it actually got the extension up here. So he was a connected fellow, and I suspect that he played quite a number of the games that we saw played in the 1870s as Pelham Manor, one of the 2 villages, was beginning to be developed, and the branch line was coming through. And there have been suggestions. You saw I had a quote earlier in this from an article that appeared, I think, in 1907, saying about a year ago, I think the phrase was. That's one of those articles that had the suggestion that as early as a year or so before that, in 1906, or perhaps slightly earlier, he was beginning to buy up that land, or had bought up that land. And I do notice a lot, I've certainly never tried to do any kind of title search in that regard, but I do notice that a lot of the sources are very imprecise as to when he bought that property. They often say circa 1906, about 1906. We think 1906. That could be established fairly easily. It's just that I have not done that. But I'm guessing that he bought that up, because he was connected and had a concept as to what was going to happen.
Thank you.
Oh, sure.
Very good.
Yes.
Like there's a home actually down the street from us, it's called the Playhouse, which is reputed to have been his home for
Some period of time.
some period of time.
Right. Let me put it this way. I don't know. I've never seen evidence he lived here. Okay, it doesn't mean he didn't own property here. And it may well have been the case that he did. I've just never seen evidence. Clearly, he did live for a long period of time in New York City. And we've got a lot of evidence to that effect. He also spent a lot of time in the happy years at the estate called Maples up in Greenwich. And that was really his home away from home for many years. Then once he went away to war, I really don't know where he considered second homes to be. So it's quite possible that it was. But once again, could easily be established. I mean, just, running the title search and starting to look at the original records and really primary sources, we could figure it out, I think.
Because the other sort of adjacent to it are two other similar stone structures, which back in the 20s were Japanese inns.
Oh, that's interesting. That's very interesting.
The Nikko Inn and the Mikado Inn.
Yeah.
That I'm not sure whether he owned them, he had some relationship with them.
And maybe an investor in them, it could have been, I don't know, that I haven't seen.
The story was that people would come up on a train, would be met by horse-drawn carriages and taken to the inns, and that among the people who came there were a number of movie stars, Mary Pickford, Douglas Fairbanks, who I gather were his buddies.
Wouldn't surprise me at all to hear that. And it wouldn't surprise me at all to see, because he did have a very wide range of investments. And he was a very wealthy man in his own right, in addition to the fact that he married into wealth as well. So,
Do you have any descendants?
I don't know the answer to that. As I was giving this presentation, I thought to myself, I don't know if he had children. I've never read about children.
That we know about.
That we know about. I don't know. I'm embarrassed to say I don't know. I should know. I know that, let's see. No, I don't know. I will tell you I don't think he did, but I may mislead you there. And I can get an answer to that for you. That's something that's just I've fallen down on that.
Just occurred to me.
Me too.
What did the obituary say? No.
The obituary made no reference to survivors at all. The obituary was, very, here were his accomplishments in life. And basically, it was fairly poignant and very sentimental, quite frankly, I thought, for a New York Times obituary. That late, that was in 1945. So. Well, thank you for asking. Yes, go right ahead.
Thinking about where you said he did his planning of different areas, you showed the similarity in those two houses. Have you put any of the original maps of the areas next to each other to see if the layouts are exactly the same with streets and stuff?
Really, no, I haven't. From what I know of your area, having been here a number of times, and from what I know of Pelhamwood, there's very little in terms of similarities. And the one thing I would say that he was very good at, and you'll know this as well as anyone, is he was very good, I think, at what you and I would think of as kind of landscape architecture. Now, I'm not suggesting that he landscaped. I mean, he was not so good at that. You kind of look out here, he's got this vast plain here that he's going to develop. But he did a pretty good job, I think, in both places of trying to lay it out so that it fit well with the land as the land existed. Certainly, he did a wonderful job on that in Pelham. Pelhamwood is an area that is high rock outcroppings. Okay? A beautiful old growth tree area on very rocky outcroppings. And I have to tell you the truth, I would never have the creativity to walk into an area pristine that would be what we think of today as what Pelhamwood was like 100 years ago, and have the imagination to be able to see where I would lay out streets there so that I could develop into home lots these areas. And yet what he's done, much like Bronxville, and much like the Masterson Road area over there, where you did have the same kind of thought being given to it, he has created an area there where the roads follow the lay of the land, but there's enough left there so that you've got high lots looking down over the roads. You've got lower lots right at street level. You sprinkle the homes in kind of all over the area so that you've got lots that break things up and make it very, very lovely. And it's because I think he did an excellent job at laying the roadways out with thought given to how can I fit lots into this lay of the land. Now, a piece of me says that's just good business, right? But another piece of me says there's a little bit more to it than that. He did such a fabulous job there, and I think he did that fabulous job here as well. That one of the things I think he was excellent at was doing precisely that. That suggests to me that you're going to see very little other than similar street names in a lot of places. You're probably not going to see the kinds of similarities between the maps, so to speak. But I certainly haven't given it that kind of study.
And Larchmont Gardens, was that lake originally there?
That lake was a lake that they expanded, and in fact, that's not like that anymore. In fact, all the photographs you see,
Been there, yes.
they call it, what they call it now is, when you see photos like what we saw there, they call it the old duck pond. That's what they call it.
Is the back of the thruway going?
The back of the thruway is near there now. You're exactly right. And again, it's a nostalgic area, but it hasn't existed like that.
And that area has a lot of ups and downs.
Same thing. He was developing areas. And think about this, okay? Here, okay, you've got, at this point in time, okay, you've got a fairly broad swath of undeveloped land. Okay? I've forgotten how many acres, but it was close to, 500 acres he bought at the time from the Van Cortlandt estate, or from the old Van Cortlandt farm. Now, in Pelham, in effect, what he bought was one of the last remaining large areas. And there, I think it may be 130 acres, something like that. So 1/5 the size of what he was developing here. So, he as you were closer to New York City at that time, you were already much more fully developed at that point in time than you were up here. And he had a bit of a luxury here in terms of the size of the land that he was able to acquire, the size of the tract of land he was able to acquire for that development. And I think, frankly, because of that, again, fortuity and foresight. Because of that fortuity and because of that foresight, that's a lot of the reason you have such a beautiful area right here next to the Hudson. I think he had the luxury of being able to acquire such a large tract for development at the time of that late big roll here.
Regarding the type of land planning you're talking about, have you found any evidence that Harmon himself did that type of planning, or did he hire?
I can guarantee you from everything I saw, he hired it. I don't think he dirtied his hands with this business at all, as best I can tell.
Have you found any evidence of who?
I have not found any evidence of who, but I do think that exists. Her papers, his wife's papers, still exist, okay, and they're in the collections of the Greenwich Historical Society. His papers are scattered, but his papers do exist in a variety of different institutions, but they've been scattered to the winds. A lot of them have been acquired by collectors of early aviation kind of memorabilia. You've got some in Purdue, you've got some in a variety of locations. It's all out there. It's just a question of who's going to have the time and the ability and the desire to do that sleuthing and put it together. I think that can be answered. I really do. But I do get the sense that he was rising in the management of a real estate brokerage organization, and then decided to do something on the real estate development side, created the company, and then, not trying to be funny, although it sounds like I am, and not trying to be flip, even though it sounds like I am, then he just kind of rolled off to do his flying. That was his passion, while the business, presumably, ran itself. Now, I tried to pull this up, I couldn't, I didn't have time today. I have in the back of my mind this visual recollection of a postcard showing a fellow in straw hat standing in front of the Pelhamwood sales office there in Pelhamwood. And in my mind's eye, I believe it's probably Clifford Harmon. And what I wanted to do was pull it up and enhance it electronically and magnify it and then lay it up next to a photo of him and let us together tonight decide, is that Clifford Harmon at the sales office of Pelhamwood, which I would never expect. But I could not track it down today. I tried, I just ran out of time today. I couldn't track it down.
Are there any other developments of this magnitude in this area? Levittown obviously is not something that we envied. And
Right.
Reston is several things in that direction. Has anybody done anything like that?
Well, the Larchmont Gardens is close